Hi everyone, and welcome to Deepfakery, a new web series of critical conversations exploring art, human rights, journalism, and deepfakes, all in a time of infodemics. I'm Karen Fife, Program Coordinator for Emerging Threats and Opportunities at Witness. For those new to this series and to Witness, we're a human rights organization that works with people who use video and technology to secure social justice.
I'm Kat Cizek, the Artistic Director of the Co-Creation Studio at MIT Open Documentary Lab. And this series is a joint presentation between our two groups. The series is supported by Knight Foundation, BuzzFeed, and Vimeo. We've all come together to examine from our many perspectives deepfake technologies, their uses, misuses in art, journalism, and documentary. For those of you who may not be so familiar with deepfakes, we're talking about new ways to use artificial intelligence to make it look like someone said or did something that they didn't, by swapping faces, simulating voices, or manipulating scenes. Today's episode is called Not Funny Anymore: Deepfakes, Manipulated Media, Parody, and Disinformation, and it will be moderated by my colleague, Corin.
Okay, thanks, Kat. So I'll be joined by three guests today. We have Jane Lytvynenko from BuzzFeed News, Brandi Collins-Dexter of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Policy, and Karen Hao of MIT Technology Review. They'll each give a short introduction to their work, then we'll take it to a panel discussion and try to end with a Q&A. But first, we have a short video to prime the conversation.
It was posted on Facebook by a far right-wing group. Again, this is not accurate. This is fake.
We want to give this president the opportunity to do something historic for our country.
I'm the only one here that I think that's ever started a business. Is that fair? Okay.
I wish I could keep telling you that our mission in life is connecting people, but it isn't. We just want to predict your future behaviors. Spectre showed me how to manipulate you into sharing intimate data about yourself and all those you love for free. The more you express yourself, the more we own you.
Now, you've probably seen this photograph of Stoneman Douglas student Emma Gonzalez ripping up the Constitution. Well, heads up, people, it's a fake. The picture is a digitally changed image of a real photograph of Gonzalez tearing up a gun target. But the doctored image has gone viral, which underscores just how important it is in these highly charged times to be sure that what you see and hear is real.
Talk about fake news. That's Parkland shooting survivor Emma Gonzalez seemingly ripping up the U.S. Constitution. The image has gone viral, but it's totally doctored. Here's the real image Emma made for Teen Vogue. She's actually tearing up a shooting target.
So, as we know at Witness, video is a powerful tool to expose wrongdoing, but increasingly, digital editing techniques, from a simple cut and paste to the more complex deepfakes, are not only undermining the reliability of video as evidence, but are creating outright forgeries that are seen as real. Today, as we know, social media feeds are flooded with misinformation, whether that's video, text, audio, and it's undermining our ability to conduct political discourse and even to some extent agree on basic facts. We also see an increase in the promotion of manipulated video and images as satire, which is one of the big things we're going to talk about today. And though there can be some clear problems with this, there are also very legitimate cases where you would want to use manipulated media satirically. So as mentioned, I have three fantastic guests to talk about this with, Jane Lytvynenko, Brandi Collins-Dexter, and Karen Hao. Rather than me describing their work, we're going to go to each of them for an introduction about how they are thinking and analyzing misinformation, up to and including deepfakes. And first off, we're going to start with Jane.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Jane. I'm a senior reporter with BuzzFeed, and I've been writing about false information online since about November 2016. And in that time, anxiety about manipulated video, and in particular deepfakes, has gotten higher and higher, especially among disinformation researchers, but also reporters. There's a big concern that sophisticated deepfakes can be used to cause chaos, specifically political chaos. But as we know from past research, and I really recommend a report by Data and Society on this problem, it's really cheap fakes or these sort of quickly made manipulated videos that have been a larger problem in the recent years. For disinformation reporters and for fact checkers, video very frequently poses the biggest challenge. And that's because we are very much lacking in tools to be able to say when a video has been manipulated or what the origin of a video is. But at the same time, we're seeing a rise in this technique. And a lot of it has really been picking up speed over the last couple of years. I think a really interesting comparison to make is between two cheap fakes that were posted on social media 2 years apart. In 2018, a conservative TV station called CRTV posted a video of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez edited as if she is doing an interview with the host of the channel.
Alexandria, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Do you have any experience that qualifies you for this job?
I was growing up during the Clinton era. And then basically when I was in middle school, 9/11 happened.
Do you have any knowledge whatsoever about how our political system works? Yikes. Does that make you a little bit nervous?
Now, that video was very easily, it could have been very easily stitched together, but we saw that same technique just this week with a video of Joe Biden that was shared by a White House staff member, Dan Scavino.
Joining us live this morning from New York. Hey, good morning. Wake up. Yes, wake up, wake up. I can't hear anything. Okay, this is your wake-up call, Harry.
There's nothing.
Okay, I'll tell you what. We are going. He's meditating. He's taking a little nap. Taking a little nap.
It was the exact same technique of essentially showing Joe Biden as if he is a part of an interview where he falls asleep, even though that interview itself was from 2011. The interesting part of this is that the responses have absolutely evolved. So whereas in the 2018 video with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez still remains online, and was largely fact-checked in the comments, the Joe Biden video was acted on fairly quickly. Both Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram all put various kinds of warnings on the video. However, TikTok as a platform did not. So when it comes to disinformation and manipulated video, there are a lot of challenges, and there are a lot of techniques that reporters need to be looking out for. As the Data and Society report that I mentioned earlier puts it, there's really no way to put this technology back in the box. So I really hope that today we can discuss a little bit about how we can confront this manipulation that's been labeled as satire by its creators, and do so with urgency before the election in November. Back to you, Courtney.
Thanks a lot, Jane. And those videos that you mentioned there are really worth looking up for viewers. There's the AOC interview with CRTV, the Biden sleeping edit. Yeah, both really great examples of things that were labeled as satire, but in fact taken as fact by a lot of the viewers. So next up, we're going over to Brandi Collins-Dexter.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on. So I currently am doing a fellowship at Harvard Kennedy's Shorenstein Center, where I've been for about a year. And before that, I worked for 6 years at an organization called Color of Change, which is the largest digital-first racial justice organization in the US, with over 7 million members in the country. The focus of my work as it pertains to this has often been this question of how does information integrity impact Black people on a number of fronts, both how we consume and process it, and the potential dangers in the ways in which others may consume and process it. Black people over a range of ages are more likely to over-index on most major social media platforms, are more likely to engage with new technology and gaming consoles, and are more likely to share new technology and content. Also, humor, parody, and satire is often a part of cultural exchanges and engagement. Some of the reasons include it's a means to process trauma in a certain way, and also because historically in the past, the idea that Black people would be angry or aggressive would often lead to a number of different types of punishment. So use of humor and satire were often a way to kind of like mask talking about real serious issues in a way that fortified us from certain attacks. And so like that's definitely wound into this broader conversation of what we have to consider when we think about regulation or shutting down, vehicles for satire. And at Shorenstein, about a month ago, I actually released a report, maybe more at this point, called Canaries in the Coal Mine. And it looked at how online disinformation in the early days of COVID, often unintentional sharing of disinformation and often wrapped in parody and satire, actually potentially had a devastating effect on what type of information Black people were able to get in the early days of COVID in order to protect ourselves from contracting it. But also we're looking at things around how like 4chan, Russia, and other countries and entities are engaging in chaos campaigns using things like digital blackface and a number of other vehicles for nefarious purposes. And so that's a little bit of the work that I do, and I look forward to talking more, and I'll kick it back to you, Corin.
Great, thank you, Brandi. And again, I would really encourage the viewers to check out the report you mentioned, Canaries in the Coal Mine. Really fantastic example of the racialized dimensions of disinformation and how very legitimate concerns that the Black community and communities of color have with medical authorities and their medical histories can be exploited by peddlers of disinformation. So lastly, we're going over to Karen Hao.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Senior Artificial Intelligence Reporter at MIT Technology Review. I cover the cutting edge research of AI, the field of AI, as well as the ethical issues and social consequences that happen when those algorithms are deployed into the real world. So that intersects really well with misinformation in that we are seeing increasingly more and more algorithms and easier to use algorithms that can synthesize generated media, falsified media, and then potentially deceive people. And as Jane mentioned, what we currently see in the misinformation landscape is mostly cheap fakes. So the Nancy Pelosi video where things are just slowed down a little bit and it kind of completely recontextualizes what actually happened. So I kind of look at what we're about to start dealing with in the future as AI becomes more and more democratized and it becomes more and more powerful. More people are going to be starting to use these advanced techniques to create these hyper-realistic fake images and fake videos, as we saw in the Mark Zuckerberg deepfake, where it basically looks like he's admitting to Facebook being a data gathering scam, but it is actually just some artists that are trying to hold Mark accountable with this kind of video. So For today, I'm really excited to talk about some of the ways that we can really think about bringing multiple actors together, technologists, platforms, researchers, and communities on this problem of misinformation, and actually move forward towards regulating the way that some of this misinformation and some of the algorithms that I cover are used.
Great, thanks, Karen. So we're here to talk about visual misinformation, deepfakes, and the intersection with satire. To start us off, why is misinformation worse today? I mean, I think maybe most of us would agree that it is. What are the factors that are changing the nature of misinformation? Maybe Jane, I'd like to go to you first because I know you've reported a lot on misinformation networks. And then Brandi, I would love to hear you talk about some of the ability to target specific groups and communities and how that works now in a way that couldn't be done before.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges with false information at the moment really is video. And it's different types of video. Deepfakes are a real extreme because they still take a lot of technological savvy to create. So in terms of impact, deepfakes is not something that we see used day to day or something that we see impacting our conversations day to day. But videos that are very quickly doctored, as we saw in the intro, or videos that are just taken out of context and miscaptioned are a very big problem for misinformation. And part of the reason why they're a much bigger problem than something like a written article would be is one, people very much lean towards the seeing is believing sort of gut instinct. If they see something that's happened on a video, they're very likely to say, oh, okay, I saw this. It's much more likely to resonate with them. But the other issue is that the amount of video that we have is very, very difficult to fact check or even put chronologically. News outlets have had to pull together entire visual investigations teams that look at the larger picture that videos are creating to be able to pull together a factual picture of what happened. And that's not something that the average social media user is able or willing to do. And even though social media companies have with this year sort of begun more proactively looking at misleading videos, there's still very few tools available to both reporters, researchers, and regular social media users that would allow them to quickly fact check what it is that they're looking at, which is a huge, huge problem. This was a particularly huge problem when the anti-police brutality protests started going viral across social media and across the world. A lot of the times videos that were either slightly manipulated or taken out of context were presented as facts. So you see a lot of demonization of protesters, as we do right now. We see a lot of sort of misconception of what happened in the situation. So for disinformation, the sheer volume of the videos and the ease with which they can be manipulated, you know, that slow down Nancy Pelosi video, you just throw it into iMovie, play it at 1.75 speed, and you're done. That poses a huge challenge, and it's something that's a real worry with the upcoming elections.
Okay, so the volume of information, one challenge, as Jane has said, but then also this ability to target very specifically misinformation at certain groups. Brandi.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if I have to be honest, I struggle a little bit with whether or not I feel like it's worse to a certain extent than it's been in the past through a racial justice lens, because Black people and a number of groups have long been regularly targeted for disinformation by the government, by private actors and entities, and that shaped a lot of people's understanding, both in the U.S. and globally, of Black people. And so this is, in some ways, not a new phenomenon. I am going to talk about some of the ways in which I think it's more pervasive on other fronts. But as I mentioned before, often in my workspace, we talk about these marginalized communities and Black people being the fastest adopters of new and open communications technology, as well as creatives and engineers in our own right. And much like the way in which historically we've seen radical free newspapers in England being smuggled in coffins, or Black and Latinx groups in the US becoming active in the amateur radio movement. And part of the reason why is because, as Napoleon essentially said, history is often written by the victors. And often what that means is that at best, our stories are left out of history, or at worst, they're manipulated to tell a different story. And this gets to what we see in terms of misinformation, disinformation today. As it pertains to Black communities, and I'm sure many other communities, the three primary differences as I see them lie in one, the speed with which disinformation can travel globally and be embedded in communities. Two, the corporate consolidation of information systems and the monetization of polarization that incentivizes outrage and disinformation. And three, I would say, actually the absence of brick and mortar or alternative institutions and media to process and discuss information. So for decades, we had local and national Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender that report on lynchings across the country. And when a local newspaper in Mississippi would say a Black farmer in Mississippi willingly left his wife and kids to go find work in Chicago, they could send journalists down or have local journalists to investigate and say, actually, no, he was lynched by the local sheriff. Or you had Black-owned businesses or religious institutions where people of various ideologies and classes lived, worked, and processed information together. But as we've seen more and more of the decline in that, online platforms are being substituted for those offline spaces. And because of the way they're built based on interest categories and a number of other factors, people become increasingly siloed in their various spaces and unable to really connect the dots as quickly and easily as maybe they could in the past.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, so much to unpack there, the local media ecosystem, the community-specific media ecosystem, and so on. But one thing I wanted to pick up on, you're talking about this kind of double-edged sword of the accessibility of publishing now. On the one hand, it gives people a platform they would never have had before. On the other hand, it's easily exploitable by misinformation actors. And so one thing that stems from that, we're here to talk about satire and parody in particular. It seems like, although there's a long tradition of political satire, there has been an increase now in the use of satire or parody as a justification for these fake news websites, parody Twitter accounts, which are then retweeted as misinformation and so on. So I wanted to ask again what you make of that. Is it fair to say that this is a newer problem, and what are some of the driving factors behind it?
In terms of labeling something that is misleading as satire, that's a tactic that has both developed over the years, but has been used as a sort of loophole to get around restrictions that social media companies put on misleading accounts. So we've definitely seen a lot of profiteering of people who say that they are creating satire, but in reality are creating, first of all, not funny headlines. Like usually none of this is funny, which I think is the biggest problem here. No, but also headlines that are quite believable. So there's definitely something that separates the classic, your classic Onion headline, which is playing into sort of known topics or known beliefs, and is very clever, very, like, if you read it, it's very obviously satire and it is labeled as such, from headlines that are very mean-spirited and are targeted at populations who are looking at those headlines who, instead of which instead of spawning, laughter or joy or sort of like knowing, understanding, like a nod of understanding, they instead play into fear, anger, panic. And we see this particularly targeted at specific populations, but I think there's one really interesting case that we could look at. There is a man who goes by the name of Busta Troll, who over the years has been written about a fair bit. And he says that he is, he brands himself as a liberal, but he runs a series of websites that target Trump-supporting Republican voters with headlines that are very frequently racist or mean-spirited, or very difficult to sort of very difficult to call satire. His websites have continued to be fairly popular over the years because when you do go to those websites, you get the big satire sort of stamp. But it's a perfect example of how false information labeled as satire is very frequently taken seriously, especially when it's targeted at populations that are already primed for that information.
So that's a nice segue. Often this question of should we mandate that all satirical media websites and so on should be labeled as satire, and also is there something you mentioned fake headlines from The Onion and so on from Busta Troll? Is there something about visual media which means it's more likely to be misinterpreted than text media? And before we answer that question, we have let's say a pretty unique video which Karen submitted, and so we're going to play that and then carry on the discussion.
I think that people can describe me however they please. It's a free country, and I'm all in favor of a public debate. Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. I said certified freak. 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word. Make that pull-out game weak. Yeah, you effin' with some wet ass P-word. Bring a bucket and a mop for this wet ass P-word. Give me everything you got for this wet ass P-word. P-word is female genitalia.
Guess what, bitch? Coronavirus! Woo, woo, woo!
Yeah, so to build on kind of your question and what Jane has been talking about, which is there's one dimension, which is people that are using satire as an excuse to try and get away with falsified media. But what I cover and what I have been fascinated by is like the genuine attempts at using this stuff for satire. And so to come to your question, Corin, about whether or not we should be labeling these things, it's interesting. I actually, at one point, I think last year, I met someone at a creative agency who was starting to confront these issues where algorithms are now at the point where it is accessible for a creative agency to use to make, to use in their advertisements. And they were kind of debating, like, how do we label this in a way that suggests that it's satire or that it's altered? Are there any norms around that? And the reason why I wanted to show the Ben Shapiro deepfake, just for context around that, if you're unfamiliar, Cardi B dropped the WAP song, and then Ben Shapiro tried to satirize that song by Ben Shapiro, being a conservative political commentator, was trying to satirize it by reading the lyrics in this very awful way. And then all these other people started making deepfakes of him in the music video with like the audio of him reading the lyrics overlaid to satirize him because he like fundamentally misunderstood the power of that music video. And in that particular deepfake, you can see that it's like very obviously faked. And so there's kind of like no no possibility of someone to look at this and think that like this was actually the way that a video was shot. And it's also not satirizing real news. It's satirizing an environment that was already a creative environment. So it's very clear that there's no like misconstruing that's possible. Whereas with the Mark Zuckerberg video, which was also one that I submitted, it was a group of artists that were trying to actually part of a series develop these deep fakes that satirize different figures, powerful figures, and try to bring awareness to the way that we are losing our data privacy as users of giant tech platforms. And in that one, because it's less obvious visually that this is a faked video, and it's also about real events, it kind of starts to blur the line. And so when I think about that, it's like, definitely we do need to figure out some way of labeling these videos, but it's because there's clearly differences between the ways that these deepfakes get generated, but that it kind of is a discussion that needs to be had between civil society, between policymakers and tech platforms on like, where do we actually draw the line in deciding what videos get labeled and which ones do not.
Okay, so I'd like to quickly remind anyone watching the streams, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can just drop them into the chat and we'll relay them. But Brandi, let's go to you. So there are some of these, there are deep fakes, some are ambiguous, some are clearly satire. Are you concerned about the deepfake videos most, or what's the type of misinformation that's most on your mind?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to double down on everything that Jane and Karen said. Yes, also it should be funny, and at the time it's not, which is kind of ridiculous. And also, I think that there's something about this bailout of the labeling that I worry about. Like, one, they haven't even really treated content moderators well enough as full-time employees, trained, et cetera, for a number of things to catch written content, let alone video and image content, which can, for a number of reasons, be actually harder to catch. Also, I believe MIT released a study that showed something like, if you move to this labeling process, then the things that you miss, the things that don't get labeled, people are more likely to automatically take as being real. And so I think that is also an issue that worries me. But to pull back out, so at Shorenstein, we're looking at a lot of examples of digital blackface and 4chan white nationalist operations. And so I have to look at a lot of like really crude and disgusting attempts to mimic Blackness online in order to perpetuate a negative stigma about Black people. I also see like the celebration of Black death as told through grotesque visual imagery. I believe something like, I think over 90% of deep and maybe cheap fakes as well online are pornographic. So actually process that in the context of Jane talking about how much time, energy, and technology is needed to develop these, and that so much of it goes towards pornographic images, and then juxtapose that over like one of the most common that we see are content involving Black men, often with white women, sometimes celebrity white women. It's meant to sort of fetishize, dehumanize, minimize, and render invisible Black men and women. And even when you look at some of the more prominent examples that we see of deepfake videos and content, it's not an accident that it overwhelmingly tends to be women, people of color, people from LGBTQ+ communities and other marginalized communities. And when George Floyd died, for example, there was a lot of really gross manipulated images of him and things that ranged from Colin Kaepernick kneeling on his body to other sort of pornographic images. And these are things that may not make it into the mainstream. We may never see them. The problem for me is like, who does and how that impacts how they make day-to-day decisions. We know in closed police Facebook group, for example, that visual images, memes, and deepfakes are like widely shared. We know that in these white nationalist spaces, and because of pseudo-anonymity, we don't necessarily know who's in those groups that these images are getting shared. So when they go out and make day-to-day decisions about whether or not to shoot, to kill, or how to treat people on a day-to-day basis, this like dehumanizing process is part of what they're engaging in.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's absolutely true, as you highlight, Brandi. You know, deepfakes were originally conceived as a pornographic technology, but there's so much in there that's really, you know, is it pornography? Is it actually really about control over women and so on, and targeting of other minorities? Okay, so unfortunately, our stream was cut short by technical difficulties, but a big thank you to our panelists, Brandi Collins-Dexter, Jane Lytvynenko, and Karen Hao. Thanks also to all of my colleagues behind the scenes from Witness and MIT. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Knight Foundation, and to BuzzFeed and Vimeo for media support on the series. I'll now hand over to Kat, who will give us a heads up on next week's episode of Deepfakery.
Thanks, Coram. Next week, we're meeting on Tuesday instead of Thursday, still at noon ET, for a special episode that takes a deep dive into deepfakes for good. We'll learn about the extraordinary efforts of a documentary director using AI-generated face doubles to protect the identity of his subjects. The film is called Welcome to Chechnya, and it follows activists' efforts to support LGBTQ+ refugees as they flee state-sanctioned violence in Chechnya. David France, the director, swapped out 23 faces for a total of 60 minutes running time in this must-see feature film. Join us next week, behind the scenes with David. Till next time.